The arrogant billionaire mocked his driver's daughter until she made him beg for her love. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The rain hammered against the windows of Morrison and Associates like bullets against glass, each drop echoing through the empty corridors of Manhattan's most prestigious law firm. Delphine Reed pushed a strand of her natural curls behind her ear, her dark eyes scanning the contract amendments that seemed to blur together after 14 hours of relentless work. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across her mahogany skin, but even exhaustion couldn't diminish the fierce intelligence that radiated from her every movement. At 24, Delphine had already earned the respect of senior partners who initially dismissed her as just another pretty face trying to climb the corporate ladder. They learned quickly that beneath her striking beauty lay a mind sharp enough to cut through the most complex legal jargon and a determination that could move mountains. Tonight, like so many others, she stayed late to prove she belonged in this world of marble floors and $1,000 suits. Her phone buzzed against the polished desk. Dad flashed across the screen. "Hey, Papa," she answered, stretching her neck to relieve the tension that had settled there like a stubborn knot. "Delphine, baby, I'm so sorry to ask this, but—" Marcus Reed's voice carried that familiar apologetic tone that always made her heart clench. "Mr. Hartwell's car broke down in Midtown. He's not happy, and I need to go get him. Could you maybe ride along? I don't like driving alone this late, especially in this weather." Delphine glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. She should say no. She should go home, run a hot bath, and forget about the world of entitled billionaires who treated people like her father as disposable. But the exhaustion in Marcus's voice, the same exhaustion she'd heard growing up whenever he came home from another day of invisible servitude, made the decision for her. "I'll be down in 10 minutes. The elevator descended through floors of sleeping ambition and dormant dreams. Delphine caught her reflection in the polished steel doors, her fitted black blazer still crisp despite the long day, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun that somehow managed to look both elegant and defiant. She looked like she belonged in these hallways, even if the world constantly reminded her she didn't. Marcus was waiting in the lobby, his usually pristine chauffeur's uniform slightly wrinkled, worry lines etched deeper around his kind eyes. At 52, he still carried himself with dignity, but 23 years of bowing his head to the Hartwell family had left invisible scars that only Delphine could see. "You sure about this, sweetheart? He's been drinking, and when he drinks—" Marcus shook his head, keys jingling nervously in his weathered hands. "I'm sure, Papa. Besides, someone needs to make sure you get home safe too." The black Mercedes sedan cut through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets like a shark through dark water. Delphine sat in the passenger seat, watching her father navigate the familiar route to Midtown with practiced ease. They'd made this journey countless times, not together, but Marcus had shared stories of late-night rescues and early-morning airport runs, tales of a man who treated human beings like expensive possessions to be used and discarded at will. "There he is," Marcus muttered, spotting a figure hunched under the awning of a closed restaurant. Even through the rain and distance, Augustus Hartwell commanded attention. He stood with a kind of arrogant posture that screamed entitlement, his expensive coat draped over his shoulders like a cape, phone pressed to his ear in what appeared to be an animated conversation. At 29, Augustus Gus Hartwell was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about and fathers threatened with shotguns. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of devastating good looks that came from generations of good breeding and better nutrition, he was Manhattan royalty in a custom-tailored suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled even in the rain, and his grey eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who had never known defeat. Marcus pulled up to the curb, and Augustus yanked open the back door with unnecessary force, bringing with him the scent of expensive whiskey and barely contained rage. 47 minutes. Marcus, 47 goddamn minutes I've been standing in this weather because you can't answer your phone like a competent employee." His voice was smooth, educated, and dripping with the kind of venom that came naturally to those born with silver spoons. "I apologize, Mr. Hartwell. I don't care what you were doing. Your job is to be available when I need you. That's what I pay you for." Augustus settled into the leather seat, his presence filling the car like smoke from a burning building. Delphine's hands clenched into fists on her lap, but she remained silent, invisible. She'd learned long ago that in this world, people like her were furniture, present but insignificant. "Oh, take me home," Augustus commanded, already pulling out his phone. "And next time, remember that time is money. My time, specifically, which is worth considerably more than whatever pathetic salary my father pays you." The car pulled into traffic, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the storm. For several blocks, the only sounds were the rain, the engine, and Augustus's aggressive typing. Then he made a phone call. "David? Yeah, it's me. The Singapore deal is off the table. No, I don't care what they offered. Find me something better. Because I said so, that's why." He ended the call and immediately dialed another number, his voice growing louder and more aggressive with each conversation. Marcus's shoulders tensed with every harsh word, but he kept his eyes on the road, professional mask firmly in place. It was during the fourth call that Augustus's filter finally dissolved completely in alcohol and rage. "You know what your problem is, Marcus," he said suddenly, his voice taking on that particular tone rich people used when they wanted to remind the world of their superiority. "You and your kind think you're entitled to respect you haven't earned. You drive my car, you take my money, but you act like you deserve more than your station in life." Delphine felt her blood turn to ice, but Marcus just gripped the steering wheel tighter. "And that daughter of yours," Augustus continued, his laugh cold and sharp as winter wind. "Marcus, really? You think sending her to college and letting her play dress-up in some law office is going to change what she is? She's the help's daughter, and that's all she'll ever be. People like you should accept your place and stop reaching for things that were never meant for your hands." The car fell silent, except for the storm outside. In that silence, something fundamental shifted in Delphine's chest, not breaking, but hardening into something sharp and unforgiving. "You want to know the really funny part?" Augustus's voice grew more animated, feeding off the silence like a parasite. "I bet she actually thinks she's going to make it in that world. That she can compete with people who were born to succeed. It's almost cute in a tragic sort of way." Marcus's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely a whisper. "Mr. Hartwell, please what? Please stop speaking the truth. Your daughter can play lawyer all she wants, but at the end of the day, she'll always be exactly what she was born to be. Nothing special." That was the moment Delphine Reed decided that Augustus Hartwell was going to learn exactly how special she could be. She turned in her seat, and for the first time that night looked directly at the man who had just declared war on everything she was and everything she hoped to become. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror, and something electric and dangerous passed between them. Recognition, challenge, and the first spark of what would either destroy them both or transform them completely. "Is there something you wanted to say?" Augustus asked, his voice suddenly curious, as if he'd just noticed her presence. Delphine smiled then, slow and predatory, her dark eyes never leaving his. "Not yet," she said quietly, her voice carrying the promise of storms to come. "But soon." The rest of the ride passed in charged silence, both of them acutely aware that something irrevocable had just begun. By the time they reached the Hartwell mansion on the Upper East Side, the rain had stopped, but the storm, the real storm, was just getting started. As Augustus stepped out of the car without another word, Delphine made herself a promise that would change both their lives forever. Augustus Hartwell was going to learn what it meant to beg, and she was going to be the one to teach him. 3 days after the storm, Delphine sat in the corner booth of Café Luna, a small coffee shop in the financial district that catered to ambitious young professionals who couldn't afford the Michelin-starred restaurants but refused to settle for chain coffee. The morning sun streamed through rain-spotted windows, casting long shadows across her open laptop as she scrolled through financial news with the focused intensity of a hawk studying its prey. Augustus Hartwell's face stared back at her from the screen of her MacBook, a professional headshot from Forbes that captured his arrogant smirk perfectly. The article detailed Hartwell Industries' latest acquisition attempt, a mid-sized tech company called Nova Tech Solutions that specialized in cloud computing infrastructure. It was exactly the kind of aggressive expansion that had made the Hartwell empire worth $12 billion, and exactly the kind of move that required flawless execution to succeed. Delphine's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she absorbed every detail. 23 years of watching her father navigate the world of the ultra-wealthy had taught her their patterns, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Men like Augustus believed their money made them invincible. But money was just a tool, and tools could be turned against their wielders by someone clever enough to know how. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and roommate, Natasha Williams. "Girl, you've been MIA for days. Everything okay?" Delphine typed back quickly. "Working on something important. Tell you later. This better not be about some man." If only Natasha knew. This wasn't about a man. This was about justice, dignity, and proving that Augustus Hartwell had underestimated the wrong woman. Delphine closed her laptop and walked the 6 blocks to Morrison & Associates, her heels clicking against the pavement with military precision. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower that reached toward the sky like a glass and steel middle finger to anyone who dared dream small. She'd been here for 2 years now, working her way up from intern to junior legal assistant, earning respect one carefully crafted brief at a time. "Delphine," called Jessica Morrison, one of the founding partners, as she stepped off the elevator. Jessica was a formidable woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation destroying corporate executives in court. Perfect timing. "I need someone sharp to review the Kellerman merger documents. Think you can handle it?" "Absolutely." Delphine accepted the thick file folder, but her mind was already racing ahead to other possibilities. "Jessica, can I ask you something? Hypothetically, if someone wanted to research a company's recent filing history, what would be the best approach?" Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly. "Hypothetically, SEC filings, quarterly reports, any pending litigation. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about due diligence procedures, for future reference." "Well, future reference suggests ambition. I like that." Jessica smiled approvingly. "Carry on. Counselor, counselor." The word sent a thrill through Delphine's chest. Someday, soon, that wouldn't be a joke. She spent the morning diving deep into Hartwell Industries' corporate structure, using her legitimate access to legal databases to map out Augustus's business empire like a general studying enemy territory. What she discovered was fascinating. For all his arrogance, Augustus was a genuinely brilliant businessman. His deals were aggressive but sound, his investments diverse and profitable. He wasn't just riding on daddy's coattails. He was expanding the family fortune through calculated risk and ruthless execution. But even brilliant men made mistakes when they let ego drive their decisions. The Novatech acquisition was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. The tech company's CEO, Richard Novak, was known for being eccentric and unpredictable. He'd built his company from nothing and valued loyalty and respect above pure profit. According to industry gossip, he'd already turned down 3 acquisition offers from larger competitors, including Google and Microsoft. Delphine leaned back in her chair, pieces of a plan beginning to form. Augustus would approach this deal the same way he approached everything, with arrogance and the assumption that money could buy anything. But what if someone had already poisoned that well? During her lunch break, she took the subway to Brooklyn to visit someone who might have the connections she needed. Carlos Rodriguez owned a small but well-respected tech consulting firm that specialized in helping minority-owned businesses navigate corporate partnerships. Delphine had met him through a networking event for young professionals of color, and she remembered him mentioning work with several mid-sized tech companies. Delphine Reed! Carlos stood up from behind his cluttered desk, arms spread wide in welcome. His office was a chaotic mix of cutting-edge technology and old-school personal touches, family photos, diplomas, and a Yankees pennant from their last World Series win. "Bitch, what brings Manhattan royalty to my humble kingdom? I need a favor, Carlos, and maybe some advice." She outlined what she needed without revealing her true motivations. She wanted an introduction to Richard Novak, and she wanted information about his decision-making process when it came to potential partnerships. Carlos listened with growing interest, his dark eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Novak's a good guy," he said finally. "Old-school Silicon Valley, brilliant, passionate, but he hates corporate bullshit. Word is he's been getting a lot of pressure to sell lately." Carlos paused, studying Delphine's face. "Can I ask why you're interested?" "Let's call it a research project. I might want to do some consulting work with tech companies eventually." Carlos didn't look entirely convinced, but he pulled out his phone anyway. "I'm having drinks with him Thursday night. Brooklyn Heights, this little bar called the Promenade. You should come." Perfect. Thursday evening found Delphine in her most carefully chosen outfit, a midnight blue dress that managed to be both professional and stunning, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height and infinity to her confidence. The Promenade was the kind of intimate bar where serious conversations happened over expensive whiskey, and Richard Novak was exactly what she'd expected. Mid-40s, silver-haired, with the intense focus of someone who'd spent decades turning code into gold. "So you're the brilliant legal mind Carlos has been telling me about," Richard said as they shook hands. His grip was firm, his smile genuine. He says you're interested in the intersection of law and technology." "Among other things." Delphine accepted the glass of wine Carlos offered her. "I'm particularly interested in how tech companies maintain their independence in an increasingly consolidated market." Richard's expression darkened slightly. "Don't get me started on that. These corporate vultures think they can just swoop in with enough money to buy a man's life's work. They don't understand that some things can't be purchased. I imagine you've had experience with that recently." "More than I care to think about." Richard took a long sip of his whiskey. "Latest one was this morning, actually. Some hotshot from Hartwell Industries. Augustus something. Arrogant kid who thinks his trust fund makes him Steve Jobs reincarnated." Delphine's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "That must have been frustrating." "Oh, it gets better. This guy doesn't just make an offer, he makes demands. Tells me how he's going to improve my company, what changes he'll make, how my employees should adapt or find new opportunities elsewhere. Like he's doing me a favor by destroying everything I've built." Carlos shook his head. "These young billionaires have no respect for the people who actually create value. The worst part," Richard continued, warming to the subject, "is that he clearly hadn't done his homework, kept calling my head of development David when his name is Daniel, mispronounced half my product names, and suggested we could streamline operations by moving development overseas. The man has no idea what he's trying to buy." Delphine felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Augustus's arrogance wasn't just morally repugnant, it was tactically stupid. "What did you tell him?" "I told him what I tell all of them. Novatech isn't for sale. Not to him, not to anyone who sees my company as just another line item on a balance sheet." Richard raised his glass. "Here's to the crazy ones who still believe in building something that matters." They clinked glasses, and Delphine filed away every word. By the time she left Brooklyn that night, she had Richard Novak's phone number, an invitation to tour Novatech's offices, and most importantly, detailed intelligence about Augustus's approach to the acquisition. Back in her apartment, a modest but tastefully decorated space she shared with Natasha in the Lower East Side, Delphine sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a plan crystallizing in her mind. Natasha was at her boyfriend's place, leaving Delphine alone with her thoughts and her growing determination to teach Augustus Hartwell a lesson he'd never forget. She opened a new document and began typing, "Confidential Memo, Market Intelligence Report on Hartwell Industries." The report she crafted was a masterpiece of strategic misdirection. Using publicly available information and careful speculation, she painted a picture of Hartwell Industries as an empire in subtle decline, over-leveraged, poorly diversified, and dependent on increasingly risky acquisitions to maintain growth. The Novatech deal, she suggested, was less about strategic expansion and more about desperate attempts to enter new markets before competitors left them behind. But the real genius was in what she did next. She created multiple anonymous accounts on financial forums and social media platforms, then began seeding carefully crafted doubts about Hartwell Industries' stability. Nothing actionable, nothing that could be traced back to her, just enough whispers to create market uncertainty. By midnight, she had launched phase 1 of her campaign. Augustus Hartwell thought he could dismiss her as nothing special, but he was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones you never saw coming. As she prepared for bed, Delphine caught her reflection in her bathroom mirror. Her eyes held a new fire, a dangerous gleam that would have made Augustus reconsider his words if he could have seen it. She was no longer just Marcus Reed's daughter, no longer just another ambitious young woman trying to climb the corporate ladder. She was a force of nature, and she was coming for him. The Hartwell Industries boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the crystalline tower that bore the family name, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan that had been purchased with generations of ruthless ambition. Augustus sat at the head of the mahogany table that could seat 20, but today held only 5. Himself, his CFO, David Chen, his head of acquisitions, Patricia Wells, and 2 junior analysts whose names he'd never bothered to learn. "The Novatech numbers don't add up," David was saying, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of frustration. "Their projected growth seems optimistic." Augustus barely looked up from his phone, where he was reading the latest Wall Street Journal article about tech sector consolidation. Since when do we care about optimistic projections? Half of Silicon Valley runs on optimism and venture capital. "This is different, Augustus." Patricia's voice carried the weight of 15 years closing deals that lesser mortals considered impossible. "There's chatter in the market. Questions about our leverage ratios, speculation about cash flow issues." Speculation from whom? Augustus finally lifted his eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Name sources. Patricia, I don't deal in gossip." "That's just it. No one knows where it's coming from. Anonymous posts on financial forums, whispers at industry events. But it's consistent, and it's detailed enough to sound credible." Augustus set down his phone with deliberate precision. In the 3 years since taking over day-to-day operations from his father, he'd built his reputation on information warfare, knowing everything about his targets while revealing nothing about himself. The idea that someone was playing his own game against him was both infuriating and intriguing. "Show me." Patricia slid a tablet across the polished table. Augustus scrolled through screenshot after screenshot of forum posts, social media discussions, and investment blog comments. Each one painted Hartwell Industries as a house of cards built on borrowed time and daddy's money. The language was sophisticated, the financial analysis surprisingly accurate, and the overall effect devastatingly effective. Hartwell Watch 2024. Anyone else noticed the debt-to-equity ratios in their last quarterly? Leverage to the gills and betting everything on acquisitions. Classic overextension pattern. Market maven. The Novatech deal screams desperation. Why chase a mid-tier cloud company unless you're hemorrhaging market share to Microsoft and Amazon? Wall Street warrior, trust fund baby playing with daddy's empire. History is littered with second-generation failures who thought birthright equals competence. Fucking cowards, Augustus muttered, but his mind was already racing through possibilities. David, run a full financial audit. I want to know if there's any truth to these claims, and I want to know yesterday. Already on it. Preliminary numbers show we're solid, but perception is reality in this business. If investors start believing we're unstable, they won't. Augustus stood abruptly, his 6'2" frame commanding the room's attention. Because we're going to find whoever is behind this and destroy them so thoroughly that no one will ever question Hartwell Industries again. The meeting dissolved into tactical discussions about crisis management and market manipulation countermeasures, but Augustus's mind was elsewhere. Someone had declared war on him, and he intended to win it. 3 hours later, he found himself in the back seat of the Mercedes, Marcus Reed, navigating the evening traffic with his usual silent efficiency. Augustus barely registered the man's presence. Drivers were furniture, after all. But tonight something nagged at him, a memory from the storm, a feeling that he'd missed something important. "Marcus," he said suddenly, causing the older man's shoulders to tense. "Your daughter, where did you say she works?" "Morrison and Associates, sir. She's a legal assistant." "Morrison and Associates." Augustus rolled the name around in his mouth like expensive wine. Morrison and Associates was known for aggressive corporate litigation, the kind of firm that could tear apart financial statements and corporate structures with surgical precision. And she has access to... What kind of information there? Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wouldn't know, Mr. Hartwell. We don't discuss her work." There was something in the man's tone, a protective edge that Augustus found amusing. As if a driver's daughter could pose any real threat to an empire built over 4 generations. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, began to grow. That evening, Augustus made 3 phone calls. The first was to a private investigator named Trevor Blake, who specialized in corporate espionage and had helped Hartwell Industries uncover industrial sabotage attempts in the past. The second was to his head of IT security, requesting a comprehensive audit of all digital footprints associated with the anonymous posts. The third was to his father. "Don't you think Reed's girl is behind this?" Harold Hartwell's voice carried the gravelly authority of a man who'd built an empire through equal parts brilliance and brutality. "That's either paranoid thinking or strategic genius. Which one are you betting on?" "I'm not betting on anything," Augustus replied, standing at the windows of his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. "I'm investigating every possibility until I find the truth." "Good. But remember, son, sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who have nothing left to lose. If Reed's daughter is behind this, ask yourself why she'd risk everything to come after us." Augustus ended the call with his father's words echoing in his mind. The storm, the ride home, the girl in the front seat who'd looked at him with eyes that promised retribution. Not yet, but soon. Her voice had carried something he'd dismissed at the time, not just anger, but calculation, intelligence, promise. The next morning brought news that made Augustus question everything he thought he knew about his enemies. Richard Novak had not only rejected Hartwell Industries' acquisition offer, but had scheduled a press conference to announce Novatech's new strategic partnership with a consortium of minority-owned investment firms. The deal would provide Novatech with the capital they needed for expansion while maintaining their independence. Exactly what Augustus had hoped to prevent. "How did they put together funding that fast?" Augustus demanded, pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. "More, we had intelligence that Novak was running out of options. Patricia's research had uncovered the devastating truth. Someone had provided Novak's team with detailed analysis of Hartwell Industries' acquisition strategy, complete with predictions of their negotiation tactics and alternative funding sources. The intelligence was so accurate, it read like a playbook written by someone inside the financial industry. "Sir," David said carefully, "there's something else. The anonymous posts have escalated. Someone leaked our preliminary offer to Novatech, along with your meeting notes." Augustus felt his blood turn to ice. His meeting notes included his dismissive comments about Novak's team, his plans to restructure Novatech's workforce, and his private assessment that the company was desperate enough to accept any reasonable offer. "Find them," he said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm that his enemies had learned to fear. "I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. Find the person doing this to me and bring me their head." But even as he issued the order, Augustus couldn't shake the memory of dark eyes meeting his in a rearview mirror, promising storms to come. Somewhere in Manhattan, Delphine Reed was sitting in her law office, and he was beginning to suspect that she was no longer just the driver's daughter. She was the architect of his destruction, and she was just getting started. The game had begun in earnest, and for the first time in his privileged life, Augustus Hartwell was discovering what it felt like to be the hunted instead of the hunter. The Morrison and Associates conference room hummed with the quiet energy of legal minds dissecting corporate warfare. Delphine sat at the polished table, ostensibly reviewing merger documents, but her attention was divided between the contracts in front of her and the news alerts pinging softly on her phone. Each notification brought fresh confirmation that her strategy was working. Hartwell Industries stock had dropped 3 points in pre-market trading, and financial blogs were buzzing with speculation about the company's aggressive expansion tactics. "Delphine," Jessica Morrison's voice cut through her concentration, "I need you to handle something sensitive. We just received a rather unusual request." Jessica slid a business card across the mahogany surface. "Trevor Blake, private investigator, corporate intelligence specialist. He's asking questions about our employee database, specifically about anyone with access to financial research tools. Claims he's investigating corporate espionage." Jessica's sharp eyes studied Delphine's reaction carefully. "He mentioned your name specifically." Delphine's pulse quickened, but years of law school had taught her to maintain composure under pressure. "My name? That's strange. What did you tell him?" "I told him to schedule an appointment through proper channels if he wants information about our staff. But Delphine, this kind of inquiry usually means someone very powerful is looking for answers." Jessica leaned forward, her expression motherly but concerned. "If there's anything I should know." "There's nothing to know," Delphine replied smoothly. "I've been focused entirely on legitimate legal research. If someone has questions about my work, I'm happy to address them through appropriate channels." Jessica nodded slowly. "Good. Just be careful. Men with Trevor Blake's reputation don't ask casual questions." An hour later, Delphine stepped out of the building and immediately felt eyes on her. Across the street, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows sat in a no-parking zone. Amateur surveillance. Either Augustus was getting desperate or he was testing her nerves. She smiled slightly and walked in the opposite direction of her usual coffee shop, taking a deliberately circuitous route that would lead any tale through the maze of financial district side streets. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Emergency coffee meeting. 20 minutes. You know where?" The "where" was a small Dominican cafe in the Lower East Side that served the best cortado in Manhattan and asked no questions about hushed conversations in back booths. Delphine found Carlos already waiting, his usually relaxed demeanor replaced by barely controlled agitation. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Someone's been asking questions about you, professional questions, from someone with serious resources. Let me guess, tall, expensive suit, thinks his money makes him invisible. Worse. Private investigator, former FBI, the kind of guy who finds needles in haystacks for a living." Carlos leaned across the small table. "Delphine, what the hell have you gotten yourself into?" She stirred her coffee slowly, buying time to think. How much do you know about systemic inequality in corporate America, Carlos? Don't change the subject. This isn't about social justice. This is about you personally going after someone who can crush you without breaking a sweat. Can he, though? Delphine's voice carried a steel edge that made Carlos sit back slightly. Everyone assumes that money equals power, but power is really about information, leverage, and timing. Augustus Hartwell has money, but I have something more valuable. I understand him better than he understands himself. Augustus Hartwell. Carlos's eyes widened. Jesus, Delphine, you're going after Augustus Hartwell. The guy's worth $12 billion, and he thinks that makes him untouchable. That's his weakness. Before Carlos could respond, Delphine's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer. Delphine Reed. Her voice was calm, professional. Miss Reed, this is Augustus Hartwell. I believe we need to talk. The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Delphine's grip on the phone tightened, but her voice remained steady. I'm sorry. Do we know each other, Mr. Hartwell? Oh, I think we know each other very well. In fact, I believe we met a few nights ago in the back of my car. You made quite an impression. I'm afraid I don't follow. Augustus's laugh was cold, calculated. Let me be more direct. Someone has been systematically attacking my business interests using inside information and sophisticated financial analysis. Someone with access to legal databases and an intimate understanding of corporate acquisition strategies. Someone who promised that I would hear from them soon. Delphine felt a thrill of excitement mixed with genuine fear. He'd connected the dots faster than she'd expected, but he was also revealing that he had no concrete proof. Otherwise, he'd be talking to lawyers, not making phone calls. That's quite a theory, Mr. Hartwell. I hope you have evidence to support such serious accusations. I have instincts, Miss Reed, and my instincts tell me that you and I need to have a conversation, face to face. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. Then let me help your imagination. Your father has worked for my family for 23 years. He's been a loyal, dependable employee, and it would be unfortunate if circumstances forced us to reconsider that relationship. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Carlos watched Delphine's expression shift from calm professionalism to something darker and more dangerous. Mr. Hartwell, she said quietly, are you threatening my father's livelihood? I'm simply observing that actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences extend beyond the person who takes the actions. I see. Delphine's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of hurricanes. And what exactly are you proposing? Lunch. Tomorrow. 1 o'clock at Le Bernardin. Just the two of us. Having a civilized conversation about mutual interests. And if I decline this invitation, then I'll be forced to explore other avenues for getting the answers I need, avenues that might be less comfortable for everyone involved. Delphine closed her eyes, weighing options and consequences. Augustus thought he was cornering her, but he'd just made his first tactical mistake. He'd revealed that his investigation was still in the preliminary stages, and more importantly, he'd shown his hand. He was willing to use her father as leverage, which meant he was more desperate than dangerous. 1 o'clock, she said finally. I'll be there. Excellent. I look forward to finally meeting the woman who's been making my life so interesting. The line went dead. Delphine set her phone on the table and looked up to find Carlos staring at her with a mixture of admiration and horror. You're actually going to meet with him? Of course I am. He just gave me exactly what I've been waiting for. Which is? Delphine's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Confirmation that I'm winning. She stood to leave, but Carlos grabbed her wrist. Delphine, listen to me. Men like Augustus Hartwell don't play games they can't win. If you're going into that restaurant tomorrow, you better have an exit strategy. Oh, I do, she replied, gathering her purse and coat. But it's not what you think. As she walked back into the Manhattan afternoon, Delphine felt the familiar sensation of pieces moving on a chessboard. Augustus thought he was setting a trap, but tomorrow at Le Bernardin he was going to discover that the mouse he'd been chasing was actually a lioness. And lionesses, as any apex predator would tell you, preferred to hunt face to face. Le Bernardin existed in that rarefied atmosphere where Manhattan's elite conducted their most delicate negotiations over 24-carat gold leaf and Michelin stars. The restaurant's hushed elegance served as neutral territory for deals that could reshape industries, destroy reputations, or forge alliances worth billions. Today, it would witness something far more dangerous than a business merger. It would host the first face-to-face meeting between two people who had declared war on each other. Delphine arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, her entrance carefully orchestrated for maximum psychological impact. She wore a tailored burgundy dress that managed to be simultaneously professional and devastating. Her natural curls styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful curve of her neck. Every detail, from her pearl earrings to her confident stride, was designed to communicate one message: she belonged in this world as much as anyone. The maitre d' led her through the dining room with practiced deference, past tables occupied by titans of industry, conducting their own elaborate theatrical performances. She spotted Augustus immediately. He commanded attention even in a room full of powerful men, his presence radiating the kind of confidence that came from never experiencing genuine defeat. He stood as she approached, and for a moment they simply studied each other like chess masters, evaluating their opponent's opening move. Up close, Augustus was even more formidable than she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of classical features that belonged on Roman coins. But it was his eyes that held her attention, steel grey and sharp enough to dissect a balance sheet or a human soul with equal precision. Miss Reed. His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of the predatory amusement that suggested he was enjoying this confrontation more than he should. "But thank you for accepting my invitation, Mr. Hartwell." She allowed him to pull out her chair, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that somehow felt more like a power play. "I must admit, your invitation was compelling. I do try to be persuasive." Augustus settled into his own chair, and immediately Delphine could feel the intensity of his focus. He was studying her like a specimen under a microscope, cataloguing every detail for future use. "Shall we order first? Or would you prefer to dive directly into the more interesting aspects of our conversation?" "By all means, let's maintain the pretense of civility. I hear the tasting menu is exceptional." They ordered with the elaborate ritual that fine dining required, each course selection becoming another small skirmish in their larger war. Augustus chose the most expensive wine on the list, a gesture designed to emphasize the vast gulf between their respective resources. Delphine countered by discussing the vintner's history with casual expertise that suggested money wasn't the only path to sophistication. "You're not what I expected," Augustus said once the sommelier had finished his presentation. "When I think of Marcus Reed's daughter, I picture someone more humble. And when I think of Harold Hartwell's son, I picture someone more intelligent." The words landed like a slap, and Delphine watched with satisfaction as Augustus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "But perhaps we're both guilty of making assumptions based on limited information." "Touché." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Though I have to wonder, what kind of limited information led you to declare war on my family's company?" "I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you mean." "Please, Miss Reed, we're both adults here, and we're both reasonably intelligent. The systematic campaign against Hartwell Industries, the leaked information about the Novatech acquisition, the carefully orchestrated rumors about our financial stability, it's actually quite impressive work. Professional, even." Delphine sipped her wine, buying time to analyze his approach. He was fishing, hoping she'd confirm his suspicions, but he was also revealing how much he'd managed to piece together. "That's quite a conspiracy theory, Mr. Hartwell. Have you considered that perhaps your business practices have simply created natural opposition? Natural opposition doesn't have access to insider information about acquisition strategies. Natural opposition doesn't know exactly which buttons to push to make Richard Novak walk away from a deal worth $50 million. Augustus leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes boring into hers. But someone with your background, your connections, your particular skill set, someone like that could orchestrate exactly the kind of campaign I've been experiencing. The first course arrived, delicate scallops that looked more like art than food. Delphine took her time arranging the garnish on her plate, letting the silence stretch between them like a taut wire. "You know what I find fascinating, Mr. Hartwell," she said finally. "You seem to believe that the only possible explanation for your recent difficulties is deliberate sabotage. Have you considered that perhaps you're simply not as invincible as you thought?" "I've considered many possibilities, but the evidence points to a very specific conclusion." Augustus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Someone has been playing my game better than I play it. Someone who understood my psychology well enough to predict my moves and counter them before I even made them." "Your psychology?" Delphine raised an eyebrow. "Please enlighten me." "Arrogance." The word hung between them like a confession. "You counted on my arrogance, didn't you? You knew I'd underestimate Richard Novak because he doesn't wear expensive suits or drive luxury cars. You knew I'd dismiss the financial forum rumors because I've never had to worry about public opinion before. Most importantly, you knew I'd never suspect the driver's daughter of being capable of sophisticated corporate warfare." Delphine felt a thrill of respect for his tactical analysis, mixed with growing concern about how much he'd deduced. "That's quite a theory. I'm curious, what do you plan to do with these suspicions of yours?" "That depends entirely on you." Augustus set down his fork and fixed her with a stare that could have melted steel. "I'm prepared to offer you something most people in your position never get: a choice. I'm listening. Option 1. You end this campaign immediately, publicly retract any negative statements about Hartwell Industries, and we pretend this conversation never happened. In exchange, your father keeps his job and his pension, and you continue your promising career without any interference from me." And option 2. Augustus's smile was absolutely predatory. "Option 2 is that I destroy you. Systematically, thoroughly, and publicly. I'll have you investigated for corporate espionage, sued for defamation, and blacklisted from every reputable law firm in Manhattan. Your father will lose his job, of course, and I'll make sure that both of your names are so toxic that you'll be lucky to find work anywhere in the continental United States." The threat should have terrified her. Instead, Delphine found herself fighting the urge to laugh. Augustus had just revealed the fundamental flaw in his entire worldview. He still believed that fear and money were the only currencies that mattered. "Those are certainly comprehensive options," she said calmly, "but you seem to have forgotten something important." "Which is?" Delphine leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes meeting his with unflinching confidence. "You still don't have any actual proof. Everything you've described is circumstantial at best, and any competent attorney could dismantle your case in preliminary hearings. You're threatening to destroy me with weapons you don't actually possess. I have resources you can't imagine, Miss Reed. And I have something you've never encountered before, Mr. Hartwell." She stood gracefully, leaving her barely touched meal on the table. "I have absolutely nothing to lose." As she walked away, Delphine could feel his eyes burning into her back. She'd accomplished exactly what she'd come to do. She'd confirmed that Augustus was operating on instinct rather than evidence, and more importantly, she'd planted a seed of doubt in his mind about his own invincibility. Outside Le Bernardin, Manhattan pulsed with its usual chaotic energy, but Delphine felt a strange calm settle over her. The game had escalated to open warfare, and for the first time since this all began, she was fighting on equal ground. Augustus Hartwell had just learned that the woman he'd dismissed as nothing special was the most dangerous opponent he'd ever faced. Augustus sat in his penthouse office at midnight, Manhattan sprawling beneath him like a circuit board of ambition and broken dreams. The city that never slept had become his mirror, restless, driven, unable to find peace. 3 days had passed since Le Bernardin, and he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who'd walked away from his table with the kind of confidence that belonged to queens and conquerors. Delphine Reed had done something no one had managed in 29 years of his privileged existence. She'd made him feel genuinely uncertain. The files spread across his mahogany desk told a story that both impressed and infuriated him. Trevor Blake's investigation had uncovered layers of complexity that Augustus hadn't expected from the driver's daughter. Graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law Review, internships at 2 of Manhattan's most prestigious firms before landing at Morrison & Associates. Her academic record read like a blueprint for legal brilliance, but it was the personal details that held his attention. Father Marcus Reed, 52, employed as private driver for Hartwell family for 23 years. Mother deceased, cancer, when subject was 16, no siblings, scholarship recipient throughout education. Current residence, Lower East Side apartment, shared with roommate. No significant romantic relationships on record. Augustus paused at that last detail, a strange satisfaction settling in his chest. He told himself it was tactical intelligence, but the truth was more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. His phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. Stock recovered 2 points in after-hours trading. Whatever you said at lunch worked. If only David knew. The lunch hadn't been about damage control, it had been about understanding his enemy. And what Augustus had discovered was that Delphine Reed wasn't just an enemy. She was an enigma, a puzzle that his analytical mind couldn't resist trying to solve. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Patricia Wells entered, her usually impeccable composure showing cracks of exhaustion. At 42, she'd climbed to the top of the corporate acquisition world by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than her male competitors. Tonight, she looked like someone who'd been fighting a war with ghosts. "We have a problem," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk. "The Meridian Steel acquisition, it's falling apart." Augustus felt his blood pressure spike. Meridian Steel was supposed to be his triumph, a hostile takeover that would position Hartwell Industries as a major player in the infrastructure sector. What happened? Someone tipped off their board about our financing structure. They've implemented a poison pill defense that makes the acquisition prohibitively expensive. Patricia's voice carried the frustration of a general watching her best-laid plans crumble. Worse, they've received a counteroffer from a consortium that seems to know exactly how to outbid us without overextending themselves. Who's backing the consortium? That's the strange part. It's a group of pension funds and investment firms that have never worked together before. Someone organized them, provided detailed financial analysis of our position, and gave them a roadmap for blocking our acquisition. Augustus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar burn of recognition. Delphine's fingerprints were all over this, but proving it would be like catching smoke with his bare hands. "Sir," Patricia continued carefully, "I know you don't want to hear this, but we need to consider that someone with inside knowledge of our operations is systematically dismantling our expansion strategy." "I'm aware of the situation, Patricia. What I need from you is solutions, not observations." "Then let me be blunt. Whoever is doing this isn't just smart, they're personally motivated. This level of sophisticated sabotage requires resources, connections, and a deep understanding of how we operate. More than that, it requires someone who hates us enough to risk everything. Someone who hates us enough to risk everything. The words echoed in Augustus's mind long after Patricia left. He found himself at his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city lights and thinking about dark eyes that promised retribution. Delphine had said she had nothing to lose, but that wasn't entirely accurate. She had her father's livelihood, her own career, her carefully constructed life. She was risking all of it to wage war against him. The question that haunted him was, why? He thought back to that night in the car, trying to remember exactly what he'd said. The words came back to him in fragments, cruel observations about knowing your place and people like you. At the time, they'd seemed like natural observations about social hierarchy. Now, replaying them through the lens of everything he'd learned about Delphine, they sounded like declarations of war. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer. Augustus Hartwell. "Good evening, Mr. Hartwell." Delphine's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The sound of her voice sent an unexpected jolt through his system. Part anger, part fascination, part something he didn't want to examine too closely. "Miss Reed, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I thought you might want to know that your Meridian Steel acquisition isn't going to proceed as planned. Is that a threat or a promise? It's a courtesy. I'm giving you the opportunity to withdraw your offer gracefully before it becomes publicly embarrassing." Augustus felt his jaw clench. "And why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is watching your reputation suffer when it becomes public knowledge that Hartwell Industries attempted a hostile takeover based on flawed financial projections and inadequate due diligence. You seem remarkably well informed about my business operations for someone who claims to have no involvement in corporate warfare." Her laugh was soft, musical, and absolutely infuriating. "I'm simply a concerned citizen who believes in market transparency, though I must say your pattern of underestimating your opponents is becoming quite predictable." "What do you want, Delphine?" The use of her first name created a moment of charged silence. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, not just professional distance, but something more personal and infinitely more dangerous. "And what I want, Augustus, is for you to understand that actions have consequences. You treated my father like furniture and dismissed me as nothing special. Now you're learning that even furniture has eyes, and nothing special can become everything you never expected. This is about that night in the car. This is about dignity, respect, and the fundamental truth that money doesn't make you superior to other human beings. It just makes you louder." Augustus found himself gripping the phone tighter. "And how far are you willing to take this lesson in humility, Miss Reed?" "As far as necessary, though I suspect you'll reach your breaking point long before I reach mine." "You're playing a dangerous game." "No, Augustus, I'm playing your game. I'm just playing it better than you do." The line went dead, leaving Augustus staring at his reflection in the dark window. For the first time in his adult life, he felt something he'd never experienced before, the thrilling, terrifying sensation of being matched by an equal. Delphine Reed was no longer just an obstacle to be removed or a problem to be solved. She had become his obsession, and that realization should have terrified him. Instead, it excited him more than anything had in years. The game between them was evolving into something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous than corporate warfare. It was becoming personal, intimate, and absolutely inevitable. Augustus Hartwell was discovering that the most dangerous kind of enemy was one who made you want to surrender even as they destroyed you. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was Manhattan's annual display of wealth masquerading as philanthropy, where the city's elite gathered to write tax-deductible checks and congratulate themselves on their generosity. Augustus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his tuxedo fitting like armor, his smile sharp enough to cut crystal. But tonight, his attention wasn't on potential business connections or social climbing opportunities. Tonight, he was hunting. 3 weeks had passed since Delphine's midnight phone call, 3 weeks of escalating corporate warfare that had cost him 2 major acquisitions and approximately $50 million. She was methodical, brilliant, and utterly ruthless in her campaign against him. More disturbingly, she was making him enjoy the challenge in ways that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand when destruction had begun to feel like seduction. Augustus, darling. Vivian Ashford materialized beside him like an expensive ghost, her diamond necklace catching the museum lights. At 62, she was Manhattan society's unofficial queen, a woman who knew every secret worth knowing and most of the ones that weren't. And you look absolutely predatory tonight. Should I be concerned? Only if you're planning to compete with me for something I want, Vivian. Her laugh was knowing, dangerous. And what is it you want these days? Word is you've been distracted lately. Before Augustus could respond, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd near the museum's grand staircase. He turned, and every rational thought evaporated from his mind. Delphine Reed descended the marble steps like a goddess claiming her throne. She wore a midnight blue gown that seemed to be cut from liquid shadow, the fabric clinging to curves that could inspire both poetry and warfare. Her hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her face like a crown, and her dark skin glowed against the deep blue silk. But it was her presence that commanded the room. She moved with the kind of confidence that suggested she belonged everywhere and answered to no one. "Oh my," Vivian murmured appreciatively. "Who is that magnificent creature?" Augustus felt his world narrow to a single focal point. "That," he said quietly, "is Delphine Reed." "Reed? As in Marcus Reed, your driver's daughter." Vivian's voice carried delighted surprise. Well, no wonder you've been distracted." Delphine had been invited, Augustus realized with growing admiration and fury. Someone had sponsored her attendance at an event that cost $5,000 per ticket. Someone who wanted her to be seen in this rarefied atmosphere. But more than that, she looked like she'd been born to these surroundings, elegant, poised, and absolutely untouchable. Their eyes met across the crowded gallery, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. She smiled, not the professional mask she'd worn at Le Bernardin, but something more genuine and infinitely more dangerous. Then she turned away, dismissing him as if he were just another face in the crowd. "Excuse me, Vivian," Augustus said, already moving. He found her 20 minutes later in the Egyptian wing, standing alone before a display case containing ancient jewelry fit for pharaohs, queens. The symbolic irony wasn't lost on him, Delphine studying artifacts of power while plotting his downfall. "You clean up well," he said, approaching from behind. "Thank you. Though I have to say you look exactly as I expected. Expensive, perfectly groomed, and completely out of touch with reality." She didn't turn around, but he could see her reflection in the display case glass. "What do you want, Augustus?" "To understand you." The honesty in his own voice surprised him. 3 weeks ago, I thought you were a minor annoyance. Now you're costing me millions of dollars and making me question everything I thought I knew about corporate warfare. And how does that make you feel? Impressed? Frustrated? Curious about what other surprises you're hiding?" He moved closer, close enough to catch her subtle perfume, something expensive that he definitely hadn't expected a legal assistant to own. "Who sponsored your ticket tonight, Delphine? Does it matter? Everything about you matters now. You've made sure of that." She finally turned to face him, and the full impact of her presence hit him like a physical force. Up close, her beauty was even more devastating. But it was her intelligence that truly unnerved him. The way she studied him like a specimen that had finally revealed something interesting. "You want to know who sponsored my ticket?" She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Richard Novak. Apparently, he was so impressed by the financial analysis someone provided about potential acquisition threats that he wanted to meet the author personally. Augustus felt his chest tighten. "You introduced yourself to him." "I introduced myself as someone who understood the predatory nature of certain corporate entities. He was very receptive to that perspective. You're building a network of my enemies. I'm building relationships with people who value integrity over intimidation. The fact that they happen to be your enemies is just a happy coincidence." Before Augustus could respond, a new voice interrupted their charged conversation. "Miss Reed, there you are." Richard Novak approached with a warm smile, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between Delphine and Augustus. "And I was hoping to introduce you to some colleagues who would be very interested in your insights about market dynamics." "Of course." Delphine's smile was radiant as she turned to Richard. "I'd be delighted." As she moved to leave, Augustus caught her wrist, gently, but with enough firmness to stop her motion. The contact sent electricity shooting up his arm, and he saw her eyes widen slightly at the unexpected touch. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice carrying promises and threats in equal measure. "No," she agreed, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "It's not, but you should know, I'm not just fighting your business anymore, Augustus. I'm dismantling your entire world, one relationship at a time." She pulled free from his grip and walked away, leaving him standing alone among ancient treasures while she went to build alliances that would reshape his future. The rest of the evening became a masterclass in psychological warfare. Augustus watched from across various galleries as Delphine charmed executives, impressed philanthropists, and collected business cards like trophies. She was networking with surgical precision, targeting people who could either help her campaign or provide protection from his inevitable retaliation. But it was her conversation with Judge Helena Morrison, Jessica Morrison's sister, and one of Manhattan's most respected federal judges, that made Augustus's blood run cold. Whatever Delphine was discussing with the older woman, it involved serious expressions and knowing nods that suggested legal strategies rather than social pleasantries. By the time the gala ended, Augustus understood that he'd been outmaneuvered again. Delphine hadn't just attended the event. She'd used it to establish herself as a legitimate player in Manhattan's power structure. She was no longer just the driver's daughter seeking revenge. She was a woman building her own empire on the ruins of his. As he watched her leave with Richard Novak and several other influential guests, Augustus felt something he'd never experienced before: the intoxicating mixture of desire and genuine respect for an opponent who might actually be capable of destroying him. Delphine Reed had evolved from enemy to obsession to something far more dangerous. She had become his equal, and that realization changed everything. The game between them was no longer about winning or losing. It had become about who would possess whom in the end. The elevator at Morrison & Associates had always been a sanctuary of polished steel and hushed conversations. But today, it felt like a cage, hurtling toward an inevitable collision. Delphine stepped inside at the 20th floor, her mind focused on the quarterly reports she needed to review before her afternoon meeting with Jessica Morrison. The doors were almost closed when a familiar hand shot through the gap, forcing them open with casual authority. Augustus Hartwell stepped into her sanctuary like he owned it, which, given his family's influence, he probably could if he wanted to. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his presence filled the small space with the kind of dangerous energy that made smart people reconsider their life choices. "Are going up?" he asked, though they both knew this wasn't a coincidence. "What are you doing here, Augustus?" Delphine's voice was steady, professional, but her pulse had accelerated the moment she saw him. 4 weeks of warfare had taught her to recognize the particular way he looked at her, like a predator who couldn't decide whether to devour or worship his prey. "Business meeting with Morrison & Associates. Apparently, I need better legal representation for some recent complications." His grey eyes never left her face as he pressed the button for the 35th floor. "Though I have to admit, running into you is an unexpected bonus." The elevator climbed slowly, each floor marker pinging like a countdown to something neither of them was prepared for. In the confined space, Delphine was acutely aware of everything about him, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his breathing had shifted slightly when he looked at her, the dangerous tension coiling between them like a live wire. "How's the corporate empire building going?" Augustus asked conversationally. "Last I heard, you'd convinced 3 more of my potential acquisitions to explore alternative financing. I have no idea what you're talking about." But her slight smile betrayed her satisfaction with his losses. "Of course not. Just like you have no idea how insider information about Hartwell Industries and negotiation strategies keeps finding its way to my competitors." The elevator shuddered to a halt between floors, emergency lights flickering on as the normal illumination died. In the sudden dimness, Augustus seemed even more formidable, his features sharp as carved marble in the amber glow. "Mechanical failure," he observed calmly, but Delphine caught the way his jaw tightened with frustration. Control was everything to men like Augustus, and being trapped was his personal hell. "Don't panic," she said, reaching for the emergency phone. "These things happen all the time in old buildings." "I don't panic." But she could see the barely controlled energy radiating from him as he paced the small space like a caged wolf. Though I have to say, being trapped with my most dangerous enemy wasn't on today's agenda." "Enemy?" Delphine replaced the phone after confirming that help was on the way. "I prefer to think of myself as a corrective force in an unbalanced market. Is that what you call systematically destroying everything I've worked for?" "I call it justice." The word hung between them like a challenge. Augustus stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that could have melted steel. "Justice for what, exactly?" "Because I hurt your feelings that night in the car." "You didn't hurt my feelings, Augustus. You revealed who you really are. Someone who believes that money and privilege make you superior to other human beings. Someone who treats my father like furniture and dismisses me as nothing special because of where I come from. And that justifies corporate warfare. That justifies showing you what nothing special looks like when it has nothing left to lose." Augustus moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "You keep saying you have nothing to lose, but that's not true anymore, is it? You have a reputation now, connections, a future that extends far beyond getting revenge on me. Your point?" "My point is that you're not the desperate girl seeking justice anymore. You're a player in this game, which means you have just as much to lose as I do." Delphine felt her breath catch as he stepped even closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time we called a truce." "A truce?" Her laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "After everything you've put my family through, after the threats, the investigations, the attempts to destroy my career, after everything we've put each other through," he corrected. "Because let's be honest, Delphine, this stopped being about justice weeks ago. This became about something else entirely, which is—" Augustus reached out, his fingers barely grazing her cheek before she stepped back. The gentle touch sent electricity racing through her nervous system, and she hated how her body responded to him even as her mind catalogued all the reasons she should despise him. "This became about the fact that I can't stop thinking about you," he said quietly. "About the way you looked at me in that car, promising retribution. About how you've matched me move for move in a game I thought I'd mastered. About the way you make me feel like I'm finally facing an opponent worthy of everything I am." "Stop." But her voice lacked conviction, and they both heard it. "You feel it too." His voice was barely above a whisper. "This thing between us that has nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact that we recognize each other, predator to predator, equal to equal. We are not equals, Augustus. You're a privileged billionaire who's never faced real consequences for anything in your life. And you're a brilliant woman who's been underestimated by everyone except me." He moved closer again, and this time she didn't step back. "And do you know what I've realized in these past weeks of watching you dismantle my empire piece by piece?" "What?" "I've never wanted anything as much as I want you to choose me instead of destroying me." The confession hung between them like a lit fuse. Delphine felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack under the weight of his raw honesty and her own unwilling attraction to the man who had become her obsession as much as she had become his. "Augustus," she began, but he interrupted. "I know I can't undo what I said that night. I know I can't change who I was or how I treated you and your father, but I can change who I am now, if you'll let me." The elevator lurched back to life, normal lighting flooding the small space and breaking the intimate spell that had woven itself around them. Delphine blinked, suddenly aware that she'd been holding her breath and that Augustus was close enough to kiss. The doors opened on the 35th floor with a cheerful ding, and Augustus stepped back, his expression shifting from vulnerable confession to professional mask with practiced ease. "Think about what I said," he told her, as he prepared to leave. "But because this war between us can only end one of two ways, mutual destruction or something neither of us expected." As the elevator doors closed between them, Delphine pressed her back against the cool steel wall and tried to steady her racing heart. Augustus Hartwell had just offered her something she'd never imagined. Surrender disguised as seduction, vulnerability wrapped in desire. The most dangerous part was how much she wanted to accept. Rain hammered against the windows of Delphine's Lower East Side apartment like bullets against armor, each drop echoing the chaos raging inside her mind. 3 days had passed since the elevator encounter with Augustus. 3 days of sleepless nights and conversations that played on endless repeat. She sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by financial documents, laptop screens, and the architectural blueprints of her campaign against Hartwell Industries. But for the first time since this war began, her heart wasn't in it. "Girl, you look like hell warmed over," Natasha observed from the kitchen doorway, nursing a cup of coffee that smelled like salvation. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't delivered in a cardboard container?" "I'm fine." Delphine didn't look up from the quarterly reports spread across her coffee table. "We're just trying to finalize the Henderson Industries strategy before you destroy another one of Augustus Hartwell's business deals and prove some point that's eating you alive from the inside." Natasha settled onto the couch, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "Honey, I've been watching you wage this war for weeks, and you've never looked this miserable after a victory." Delphine finally raised her eyes, meeting her best friend's worried gaze. "It's not about being miserable, it's about justice. Justice or revenge, because there's a difference, and lately I'm not sure which one you're really after." Before Delphine could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Marcus Reed. "Papa." She answered immediately, noting the exhaustion in her own voice. "Delphine, baby, we need to talk. Can you meet me? It's important." Something in her father's tone sent ice racing through her veins. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart, but there are things we need to discuss. Things about Mr. Hartwell, about your activities lately." An hour later, Delphine sat across from her father in the same Brooklyn cafe where she'd first planned her campaign against Augustus. Marcus looked every one of his 52 years tonight, worry lines etched deep around his kind eyes, his usually straight shoulders bowed with a weight she didn't recognize. "Papa, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Marcus reached across the small table and took her hands in his weathered ones. "Delphine, I know what you've been doing. The business deals, the financial sabotage, all of it." Her blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you..." "Baby girl, I've been driving for the Hartwell family for 23 years. You think I don't recognize corporate warfare when I see it? You think I don't notice when every acquisition Mr. Augustus tries to make suddenly falls apart with surgical precision?" Delphine felt tears, threatening for the first time in weeks. "He humiliated us, Papa. He treated you like you were nothing, and he dismissed me like I was some kind of joke. I couldn't just let that stand. I know, sweetheart. I know what he said that night hurt you, and it broke my heart to watch." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "But this has to stop." "Why?" because he's rich, because he has power. Since when do we bow down to people who think they're better than us? Since those people hold our entire future in their hands. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a text message from Harold Hartwell. Need to discuss your employment situation. Monday, 9 a.m. The words hit Delphine like a physical blow. Papa, no, I won't let them. Listen to me, baby girl. I've had a good run with this family, better than most men like me ever get. But you have your whole life ahead of you. You have talent, intelligence, a future that could take you anywhere you want to go. Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Don't throw that away for an old man's pride. This isn't about pride anymore. It's about proving that we matter, that we can't be dismissed or discarded whenever it's convenient. And you've proven that, haven't you? You've shown Augustus Hartwell that he underestimated you. You've cost him millions, damaged his reputation, made him respect you in ways he's probably never respected anyone. Marcus leaned forward. But baby, there's a difference between proving your worth and destroying yourself to make a point. Before Delphine could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your father doesn't deserve to pay for your war. Gramercy Park, midnight, come alone, and we end this tonight. Marcus saw her expression change. Oh, what is it? Delphine showed him the message, watching as her father's face crumpled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Don't go, he said immediately. Whatever he wants, whatever he's offering, it's not worth the risk. What if it is, Papa? What if this is our chance to end everything without you losing your job? Delphine, men like Augustus Hartwell don't offer mercy. They offer traps disguised as salvation. But even as her father spoke, Delphine's mind was racing ahead to possibilities and consequences. Augustus had shown vulnerability in that elevator, had confessed feelings that seemed impossible for someone like him. Maybe this wasn't a trap. Maybe it was exactly what it appeared to be. A man who had been beaten, recognizing defeat and seeking terms of surrender. At 11:47 p.m., Delphine stood at the gates of Gramercy Park, Manhattan's last private park, where only residents with keys could enter the sanctuary of manicured gardens and shadowed paths. Augustus emerged from the darkness like a figure from a dream, still wearing his expensive suit, but with his tie loosened and his perfect composure cracked in ways she'd never seen before. "You came," he said, and she heard genuine surprise in his voice. "You threatened my father." "Of course I came. I didn't threaten him, Delphine. I asked my father not to fire him until we could talk." Augustus stepped closer, and she could see exhaustion in his grey eyes, vulnerability that made him look younger and infinitely more human. "Because I meant what I said in that elevator." "Which part? The part about wanting me to choose you, or the part about this war ending in mutual destruction? The part about not being able to stop thinking about you." His voice was raw, honest in ways that made her chest tighten. "And the part about recognizing that you're the most formidable opponent I've ever faced, and the only woman who's ever made me want to be someone better than who I am." "Augustus, let me finish." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the rain droplets clinging to his dark hair. "You won, Delphine. You've proven everything you set out to prove. I underestimated you. I treated you and your father with disrespect, and I paid for it in ways that will take years to recover from. But now I'm asking you to choose something different, which is, choose me. Not forgiveness, not forgetting what happened, but choosing to see if we can build something from the ashes of this war we've been fighting." The rain continued to fall around them, and Delphine felt the weight of every decision she'd made over the past 2 months pressing down on her shoulders. Augustus Hartwell stood before her, offering surrender disguised as seduction, vulnerability wrapped in desire, and the most dangerous thing of all, hope. "Odessum, and if I say no," she asked quietly, "then you go back to your life, I go back to mine, and we both spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been if we'd been brave enough to choose love over war." The word love hung between them like a bridge across an impossible divide, and Delphine realized that her answer would determine not just their futures, but the kind of woman she wanted to become. 6 months later, the Hartwell Industries boardroom had been transformed from a temple of corporate intimidation into something resembling actual humanity. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when this story began. Augustus Hartwell sitting across from his father, Delphine Reed at his side, as they reviewed the quarterly reports that showed the company's most profitable period in 5 years. "And I have to admit," Harold Hartwell said, his gravelly voice carrying grudging admiration, "when you told me you were bringing Reed's daughter onto the executive team, I thought you'd lost your mind. Now I'm wondering why we waited so long to hire someone with her strategic vision." Delphine smiled, her hand resting on the conference table where months ago Augustus had plotted her destruction. She wore a tailored navy suit that announced her new role as Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. But more than that, she radiated the confidence of someone who had found her rightful place in the world. "The transition wasn't exactly traditional," she replied diplomatically, though her dark eyes sparkled with amusement at the understatement. Augustus leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had become his business partner, his equal, and something far more precious, his redemption. Traditional was never an option with Delphine. She doesn't do anything the easy way. The meeting concluded with handshakes and satisfied nods, but as the room emptied, Augustus caught Delphine's wrist gently, the same gesture that had sparked electricity between them in that museum elevator months ago. "Now walk with me?" he asked. They found themselves on the building's private rooftop garden, Manhattan stretching endlessly beneath them, like a kingdom they had conquered together. The evening air carried the scent of late spring flowers and the promise of summer, and Delphine felt a peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been such an arrogant bastard that night?" Augustus asked, leaning against the railing beside her. "Every day," she admitted. "But then I realized that maybe we needed to go through all of that to get here. Maybe you needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered, and maybe I needed to prove I could destroy you before I could trust you with my heart." "Your heart." He turned to face her fully, his grey eyes soft with wonder. "Even after everything, some part of me still can't believe you chose me over revenge." "I didn't choose you over revenge, Augustus. I chose love over fear. There's a difference." The transformation in their relationship hadn't happened overnight. After that rain-soaked confrontation in Gramercy Park, there had been weeks of careful negotiations, tentative truces, and slowly rebuilt trust. Augustus had proven his sincerity by actions rather than words, publicly acknowledging Delphine's strategic brilliance, offering Marcus a promotion to head of transportation services, and most importantly, changing how Hartwell Industries treated all its employees. But it was the private moments that had sealed their fate, late nights working together on acquisition strategies, shared meals where they discovered they both loved terrible reality TV, quiet conversations where Augustus revealed the loneliness of his privileged existence, and Delphine shared her dreams of building something meaningful. "There's something I need to tell you," Augustus said suddenly, his voice carrying a nervous energy she rarely heard anymore. What is it?" Instead of answering, he dropped to one knee on the rooftop garden, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. The ring inside caught the setting sun and threw rainbows across the sky, but it was the look in Augustus's eyes that took Delphine's breath away. Vulnerable, hopeful, and completely devoted. "Delphine Reed," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "You brought me to my knees figuratively before I ever thought to kneel literally. You taught me that strength isn't about power over others. It's about the courage to be vulnerable with someone you love. You showed me that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's transforming them into allies." Tears gathered in Delphine's eyes as she looked down at the man who had once dismissed her as nothing special, and now knelt before her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "You made me beg for your love," he continued, and it was the most honest thing I've ever done. Now I'm begging again, not for forgiveness, not for mercy, but for the honor of spending the rest of my life proving that you were right to believe in the man I could become. Augustus, marry me, Delphine, not because I'm wealthy or powerful, but because I'm nothing without you, because together we're stronger than either of us could ever be alone. Because you're not just the woman I love, you're the woman who taught me how to love. The city sparkled beneath them as Delphine looked into the eyes of the man who had become her greatest adversary, her most worthy opponent, and ultimately her perfect match. She thought of that angry girl in the back seat of a Mercedes, promising retribution. She thought of her father, who now smiled every morning when he went to work. She thought of all the battles they had fought and all the victories still to come. Yes, she said simply, and the word contained everything. Forgiveness, love, and the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined when this story began. Augustus slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood to kiss her as Manhattan glittered around them like a constellation of possibilities. When they finally broke apart, Delphine smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had won the ultimate prize. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said, her voice playful. "That I'm the luckiest man alive. That too. But it also means I've achieved something no other woman has ever managed." "Which is?" Delphine's smile was radiant, triumphant, and full of love. "And I made the arrogant billionaire Augustus Hartwell beg for my love and mean it." As they stood together on that rooftop, the lights of Manhattan twinkling like stars below them, both of them understood that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't about conquest or destruction. Sometimes it was about transformation, redemption, and the courage to choose love over war. The driver's daughter had indeed taught the billionaire heir what it meant to beg. But in the end, what he begged for wasn't mercy or forgiveness. It was the chance to love and be loved by a woman who saw his soul and chose to stay. And that, Augustus knew, was worth surrendering everything for. The end. If you were publicly humiliated by an arrogant billionaire who treated you and your family like you were nothing special, what would you do? Would you stay quiet and accept it? Or would you fight back like Delphine did? And here's the bigger question. If that same man who humiliated you later came begging for your forgiveness and love, would you be able to give him a second chance? Or would the hurt be too deep to overcome? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you team forgiveness and fresh starts, or team you reap what you sow? Your participation on this channel means everything to us, so please share your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.